Good afternoon, good evening, good morning even. Steve, wow, let's bring Steve into view on my slide. Steve, welcome to this Areopa webinar where you will be the speaker. I'm very enthused having you over here. Typically, you stepped in not that long ago into what I call our world, the Business Central world, from Great Plains side and dived into development on the Business Central side, and I think you achieved a lot in this relatively short period. I was also happy to have you on one of my, actually the first online course I did on test automation, so we're a bit linked already for a couple of months, year almost maybe. Thanks for being here, and thanks for everybody joining in. My name is Luc van Vugt, as you might know. I'm the moderator of today, and I'll leave the main part of this webinar today to Steve. As always, we'll go to a couple of slides. Those who are here for the second time, and I saw some familiar names, or second time for whatever number of times you have been there. Your microphone is always muted. You cannot use it. But if you have questions, and yes, be invited to put your question on the GoToWebinar question window. I will pick them up, and Steve and I agreed that I will step in if your question makes sense at that point in the presentation to pose it to Steve. So probably there will not be a big Q&A section at the end of the session, but while we're moving on, we will pick up your questions. So feel free to do that. And yes, it will be recorded. It will be on YouTube, like most of the times, probably tonight, unless there is some technical hiccup, but I'll have time to put it on there. And thanks for anybody joining in. We just passed, I think last week or the week before, 400 subscribers. Spread the word, share it, make it to, well, use it to your own, well, profit, if you call it that way. If you have still people in your environment, let them know about the newsletter. We just sent out one, what was it, yesterday? Yes, with the 2 new sessions. They're on the website already, but actually there's a third one also planned. So next week I will present. It's my directions presentation where I will discuss what I think specifications should be containing. Then on the 1st of December, and that's what we planned today, so it was not in the newsletter. It's already mentioned on the website, no link yet for registration, where David Veldhoff will continue actually on his previous webinar. It was the previous webinar also we had here on building a VS Code extension. On December 15, we will have Joshua Anglisi, again, continuing on his first webinar on Power Automate, and here he's going to discuss how to build a custom BC connector. That's my part, and of course, there's always the call for speakers and topics. If you have somebody, feel free to suggest. This year, the program is already set, but there's nothing set yet for 2021, so be welcome to suggest anything. As the last slide, before I'm going to hand off to Steve, we'll thank our sponsor, ForNav, for making this available to us, and every time also opening up this webinar anyway. So they're not just allowing us to do this, but Jan Silleman always has to be on Tuesday afternoon, every once in the 2 weeks, available to let us in. So I'm going to go to switch to Steve as a presenter. So Steve, I'm going to make you a presenter right now and leave it to you to select your screen. Have fun.
Okay, excellent. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, great. Sounds good.
Okay, and I am showing my PowerPoint slide. I hope that's coming through okay as well.
Yeah, clear view.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for attending. In your European afternoon, or if you're viewing from the US, it's a little after 7 o'clock here, so it's pretty early my time. But thank you for joining us here, and thank you, Luc, for the invitation and opportunity to present for the Areopa webinars. It's a great privilege.
You're more than welcome.
So, thank you very much. So, I am here to share my roller coaster ride of learning Business Central development from scratch. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I mean, from scratch, from nothing, I knew nothing and had to start from the very, very beginning. And it was a challenging journey, to say the least. And so I thought I'd share some of the lessons and things that I picked up along the way on this journey so far this year. So with that, and my contact information is on the slide there. I'm fairly active on Twitter at Steve Endow. I have a blog, blog.steveendow.com, and I also have a YouTube channel, appropriately named /Steve Endow, where I do both videos and live streams of myself and guests. So feel free to check out all those resources. And let's jump into it. So a little bit about me and my background in entering this new world of Business Central. I've done Windows-related .NET development of various kinds for over 25 years. And so I was well entrenched in the Windows development, desktop, WinForm development world, and also web development. And in 2004, I started working with the Microsoft Dynamics GP ERP system. I'd worked with other ERP systems, Solomon 4 back in the day, PeopleSoft, and a couple others. But Dynamics GP was my kind of re-entry into the mid-market ERP space. And so I worked with that since 2004, so a solid 16 years now. I have never used Navision. I've never seen it, never installed it. I've never touched it. I think I've seen a few screenshots in books, but that is literally the extent of my knowledge of NAV. And so I am entering this with zero background of the product, the architecture, how it works. And I finally, after months of struggles fighting with Docker on different hardware and insufficient RAM and a underpowered laptop, I finally got my first BC Docker container running in 2019. And that was a very slow process, and I finally was able to focus on BC development starting in January of 2020. So it has been, less than 11 months where I've been focusing on this. And one caveat is that I'm focused on Business Central SaaS online only. There's an entire universe of knowledge of on-prem nav, on-prem BC, upgrades, all sorts of other things that people have to focus on. Just for my sanity, I'm just focusing on the BC SaaS product only, the online functionality, and anything related to development in that side of the product. So unfortunately, I'm not having to deal with any of the on-prem challenges or learning. Okay. So as I mentioned, I am very much starting from scratch, and that produces some interesting challenges. I guess one analogy is when you're learning a language, it's even more difficult than learning a language from scratch because I know how to say what I want to say in English. I guess in a sense, I know how to do something in .NET or on Windows, but I don't even know what the concept is called in Business Central. The development and architecture and design methodologies are so different that the design principles and development principles often do not translate at all in the Business Central world. It is done completely differently. So I didn't even have the language to express what I'm trying to do in Business Central oftentimes. So that can be very frustrating. So I would say if you're completely new to this like me, be patient. Just from the beginning, be patient very much with yourself. It'll be frustrating, it'll be confusing, and it may seem like you don't know where to go, but just it takes time. And related to time, you'll need to allocate time. And I'll mention a little more about my challenge on allocating time next, but it is going to require dedicated time. It's not going to be something that you can pick up in 5-minute spurts twice a day or a couple times a week. This is hours of allocated time for focused learning. And appropriately enough, that's the next key point. focus. I found that when I was trying to learn in 15-minute spurts or looking at dabbling in something and looking at some feature, some issue, and then I'd walk away for a couple of days, I would completely lose focus. I'd completely lose the learning that I had. So it often takes dedicated focus time. It may be a day, it may be several days or a week or more. And I'll explain why that was very challenging for me. But to the extent you can have dedicated focus time, I find that my learning is much more productive than very small increments that are spread out or scattered throughout a week. Feel free to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I started this journey very much alone, and am slowly building relationships and working with other people and asking for help. But when you're starting off from scratch and you're completely alone, it is really, really difficult to know how to get started. So ask for help. Ask me. Watch one of my videos. Post a comment on my blog. Hit me up on Twitter. We have a great Twitter community. Just ask for help. Just start with some simple questions, not like, how do I do everything and learn everything? But hey, I'm running into this issue. How do I resolve it? And people will be happy to jump in and help. And related to the time, this is a multi-month journey for me. I originally said during 2019 that I estimated this would be a 2-year journey for me. It would take me 2019 and all of 2020, and I might have a minimal level of competence by 2021. And I'm kind of lining up with that schedule. So it was 2 years from knowing absolutely nothing in 2019 to just barely being able to do something productive in 2021. Now, that was my particular timeline. You may have a better scenario where you can spend more time. And so let me just share why this has taken so long for me. This has been a part-time learning journey for me because I already have 2 day jobs, essentially. I provide development and consulting for Dynamics GP customers and partners. So I'll do customizations, integrations, automation projects in Dynamics GP for those customers. I also sell and support an ISV product for Dynamics GP, and I personally support approximately 500 customers in North and South America. So those are my day jobs. So I have to find time outside of those jobs where I can learn Business Central. So that's been early morning, so 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. or 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., my mornings and evenings, and also weekends. And so I've now assembled a small team that we're working together on Business Central projects. And so we have literally allocated 5 days we've taken vacation, and from Friday through Wednesday, or Friday through Tuesday, we will have 14-hour days where we are studying together, learning together, prototyping together, working through issues, and those are our extended sprints, so to speak, where we are learning. And one of the reasons why we've done that is because I found that what I call context switching is difficult. So if I'm doing Dynamics GP development in .NET from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., and then I switch over to Business Central, and then I have a support call at 3 p.m., just switching between those ideas and concepts and programming languages, you have to just completely pull your brain out of one topic and resettle yourself in another topic. And just the syntax alone and remembering what language you're typing in, it's very difficult. So for me, I find it hard to learn when I'm in 15 or 30-minute increments. I need hours, I need days to focus and let my brain sink into that content. So that has been my significant challenge and why it's taken me so long. And so if you have a day job that is not learning Business Central SaaS, is not learning Business Central development, I totally empathize. If you are one of the very lucky individuals who maybe you're working with a consulting partner who's focusing on BC, and you can have a dedicated BC learning role as part of your job, or maybe you're working with a company who is implementing BC and you get to focus on that full time, that is the fantastic scenario, right? Where you're in an environment that is focused exclusively on Business Central. Your colleagues and your coworkers are also focused on it. You can collaborate and share and learn together. I expect that would be a much more rapid learning schedule than what I've been able to carve out of my busy days. So anyway, that's some context. So where do you get started? Let's just jump right into it. This was my starting point in late 2019. I was just searching for something. Where do I get started? How do I learn the basics of nav development? I'd attended a workshop or two at Directions North America, and those were 1 or 2 hour sessions that were very helpful. I think I took one from Waldo that got you to the Hello World stage. But after you walk out of that 2 hour session, it just vanishes. That knowledge you just learned, it was all just flowing right at you. You were scrambling to type and get everything done in 2 hours, and I just couldn't digest it. So just through amazing timing, Christoph, who is my nav blog on Twitter, and he has a blog by that same name, he created for a customer or for another project, he created this amazing workbook called Programming in AL for Beginners. It is on GitHub under his MyNav blog account. You can download this PDF. It's a 100-page workbook that starts you through from the very beginning of installing Docker, getting containers set up, getting Visual Studio Code, and all of these things set up so that you can get to the point where you can develop an extension, and he even has a kind of a sample extension that you can develop to start to learn. It is very basic. It assumes you know nothing. It was a fantastic way to start learning. So I have been working through this. My colleague has been working through it as well. And this is pretty much how we learned the very, very basics, just the mechanics of starting. So I'd recommend this. There may be others out there. This just happens to be the one that was very accessible. It's free. It's easy to download and print, and or you can mark it up in your favorite PDF editor. So I highly recommend this as a great starting point. Now, as I've been working through Christoph's workbook, I have been doing live streams. So I currently have, I think 4 or 5, at least 5 different videos on YouTube that are my recordings of this entire learning process. So I've gone through each chapter, then I've done a live stream where I walk through everything and share some of the hurdles I've had, some of the gotchas I've run into, the problems I've encountered and how to resolve them. Because I found that if I go through a process or go through a set of instructions, if I don't encounter a single problem, a single error, or any complications, I actually don't learn as much. If everything is perfectly successful, I don't learn the potential mistakes I could have made or where I might have gone wrong. So what I do in these video sessions is share, okay, you're trying to install Docker, you're trying to set up your first container. Here are the problems, the dozens of problems I've encountered, so that you can try to avoid those. And I find that those problems are some of the most valuable learning experiences, because it exposes the kind of underlying mechanics that you wouldn't normally see. So if you get into using the BC container helper, if you run that PowerShell script and your BC container gets created perfectly, you may think this is just this flawless, easy process. Well, it's not always. You may have some setting wrong. There may be some configuration issue in Windows that causes you to get stuck. And I find that the earlier I learn about those problems, the more I understand about how the thing works, how Docker works, how BC container works, what I need to think about in terms of disk space, permissions, license files, and all these other ancillary things related to the process. So that's what I share in these live streams and videos. So you can definitely check that out, and I kind of walk through that process if you want to walk along in the workbook with me. So one big caveat with everything related to what I'm saying here, and this relates to Business Central, specifically Business Central SaaS, and also to the on-prem version these days as well. everything has become date sensitive. The SaaS world moves so fast and changes so rapidly that Microsoft is just running at breakneck pace to keep their documentation updated. Things are changing constantly as they add new features and make changes to the project. And the challenge there is the best workbook, the best book, the best tutorial or online video in the world will expire. If you go back to that great video 6 months later, you will notice an option is slightly different. A menu is no longer there. That option in Visual Studio or that configuration line in your app.json or launch.json, that may have changed. And if you follow the instructions on that 6-month-old article, or even worse, a 1-year-old article, it may not work exactly as the author laid out. So you have to check dates on everything. And unfortunately, some very good tutorials or documentation may no longer be applicable. You may get stuck on step 7 because something is no longer available. So just be aware of that. It is frustrating, but as long as you expect that, it won't be a huge disappointment. You'll just need to try to find an alternative resource to get past that problem that you're encountering. So with all that said, what do you need to learn? And this is where I lay out some of the nitty-gritty, some of the detailed information that I thought was helpful. So let's jump into that. Let me grab a sip of coffee here. Okay. Docker for Windows. Many people have a love-hate relationship with Docker. You will read rave reviews of Docker as this amazing technology, which paired with this product called Kubernetes is a revolutionary product for enterprises and businesses. And while that is true, for a sole developer who is trying to learn Business Central development, Docker is just one of those fundamental pieces you need in order to make that happen. And it's one of those things you need to learn, but it can be very time consuming and it can be frustrating. Some people have zero issues. They have a flawless experience with Docker and containers and they never run into any problems. And those are very fortunate people. If you look at the GitHub issues list with BC Container Helper, or you look at Twitter or look at blog posts, you will see many instances of very common problems you can run into with Docker. And it's not anything you did wrong. It's just maybe your machine doesn't have enough RAM. Maybe there's a permission issue. Maybe your antivirus doesn't like the Docker temporary files. Just dozens of possible issues. So my recommendations, this is purely my personal recommendations based on my experience of what I've read, is if possible, have a machine with Windows Server 2019 so that you can use Docker Enterprise Edition. And Docker Enterprise Edition is a fully command line or PowerShell-based install and configuration version. It runs as a Windows service. There is no UI. And while that may seem intimidating at first, I've found it to be very stable. It doesn't force you to have updates. It doesn't nag you with pop-up windows. It works very well on Windows Server 2019. You can absolutely use Windows 10 with Docker Desktop. That I would say is the more popular choice simply because it's more accessible. However, you need to be a little more careful about it, particularly the updates and how you manage it. So just be aware you may run into some issues. You can run Docker in a virtual machine. It is definitely possible. People do it all the time. However, I recommend a local install on bare metal, as it's called. So you install it on a dedicated machine if possible. It just gives you much better performance, particularly due to the heavy I/O and disk access that you'll need. So a local install with SSDs just provides a much faster experience. I recommend new hardware. I would not recommend using it with anything more than a 4-year-old machine. So the newer the hardware, the better, because there are certain things about Hyper-V and Docker that just don't work properly on older motherboards and CPUs. So a fast CPU, solid state drives, I highly, highly recommend. Minimum, absolute minimum of 16 gigs of RAM. It should work okay on 16 gigs of RAM on a dedicated machine with nothing else running, but it doesn't hurt to have 32 gigs or more. I personally run on 64 gigs of RAM in a desktop class machine that I use as a server. Fast internet is very, very helpful. You're going to be downloading easily 10 to 15 gigabyte downloads for your Docker images, and that takes time. So do not try to do this on spotty Wi-Fi at the internet cafe or hotel. A solid internet connection is very important here. It will eventually download, but you may have to let it run overnight for hours, and if it times out or disconnects, you'll have to restart. So these things combined, hardware and internet, can make the difference between a process taking 5 minutes versus a process taking an hour or more. It is a huge difference between the two depending on the performance of your hardware and your internet. Windows updates. I totally understand the need for Windows updates, but several times I have been pushed preview updates without being asked. I don't know how they're happening, but when I look at Windows update, I see that this Windows 10 update or Windows Server update is a quote preview. I don't know why I'm receiving those, but what it does is it updates me to a newer Windows version that is not mainstream and is not supported. So as soon as those updates install, I can no longer create a Docker container. I get an error due to an OS version mismatch. There is a workaround for this, but I would just caution you to avoid preview updates, be careful with Windows updates, look at what they are, and just be prepared to roll those back or uninstall them. The same goes with Docker. It's particularly Docker desktop with Windows 10. You will be prompted, hey, we have this new Docker version. Do you want to install or update? If you click yes, it may break your Docker containers, your Business Central Docker containers. So just be aware of that. You may want to stop all your containers, make sure you have nothing valuable in them and that they can all be wiped if something goes wrong, and then carefully update Docker. You'll want to know what's going on. So on the one hand, you may not want to know everything in the world about Docker, but some minimum knowledge is required because you will run into some issue and you'll want to know how to troubleshoot it. And I have a couple of live stream videos on my YouTube channel where I show some of those problems. Like I made a network setting change. It completely corrupted the Docker networking configuration. Nothing worked. So I had to figure out, okay, how do I delete that configuration without being able to start Docker? Little things like that you'll want to be able to troubleshoot. Okay, next up, BC Container Helper. This is the name of the fantastic utility that Freddie Christensen from Microsoft has created for us to help us automate the creation and maintenance of our BC Docker containers. And it is fantastic. However, it is a product, a utility in its own right that you will need to learn and understand. It is a PowerShell module that you run via PowerShell commands, and it helps you manage your containers, create them, delete them, and do all these other things, but you need to learn it and understand it. So many people are reluctant to learn it because it's PowerShell, it seems confusing on the command line, but now he has a wizard to help you walk through the process of creating the scripts. It's become very user-friendly. So I highly recommend taking some time to learn it, and I also have a dedicated live stream video on walking through the new BC Container Helper with the wizard and showing you how to make those choices. And again, he is constantly updating it, so some of the things in my blog posts or my live streams may be slightly outdated, but the concept should carry over to the latest version. And also, if you're not familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, I recommend looking at Christoph's GitHub repository, mynavblog/notebooks with a capital N, where he has assembled a handy Jupyter Notebook that you can use to walk through the BC Container Helper PowerShell commands. And so it's a fantastic technology where you use this application called a Jupyter Notebook, where you can interactively walk through the notebook and run commands, see the output as you walk through the tutorial in the notebook. So definitely check that out. It's a great resource. So you're thinking, okay, Docker, that involves PowerShell, BC Container, that involves PowerShell. Do I really need to use PowerShell? And for better or worse, yes, I do recommend it. I did not want to learn PowerShell. I held out as long as I could, but I eventually gave in and realized I need to learn PowerShell. So PowerShell and PowerShell ISE, PS1 scripts, you will need to learn at least PowerShell fundamentals. What are some of the commands, variables, object, commandlets, modules? What does all this mean? It's not that hard. It's not like a programming language in the traditional sense as I think of it, but it is something you will want to know. And I recommend Shane Young's series on YouTube. It's several years old, but it's still perfectly applicable. And you don't need to go through all 30 videos that he has. I'd say the first 1 or 2 or 3 will be plenty to just get you up to speed to understand some of the quirks and differences and oddities of PowerShell. And once you understand those, it'll just be very easy to work with. I really should have watched his videos from the beginning. Instead, I struggled learning the stuff myself and wasted a lot of time as I learned. But if you start with his videos and just accept that you're a beginner and walk through the process, it will just save you hours of time. So just spend a few hours on that. It'll save you some time and it'll just make your life easier when you're working with both Docker and BC Container Helper. So once you know some Docker and some PowerShell and some BC Container Helper, you're going to want to know some BC Docker commands. And so I have a blog post where I wrote down the common commands that I use, and I can't memorize them. I regularly pull up my own blog post just to remember what these commands are, because I just don't use them enough to remember them. So how do you list your Docker containers? How do you start and stop them? How do you delete them, clean up files? You'll need to know all this stuff. It's part of the Business Central Docker container housekeeping and management. So check out that blog post. If you have any questions or any commands that you like, feel free and let me know. Okay. Visual Studio Code. In the Business Central Development for Beginners workbook, Christoph walks you through downloading and installing this code editor. Fantastic editor. I come from the full Visual Studio development environment world with .NET on Windows. So this was actually a very big transition for me. It was very disorienting because it's this, it appears to be such this basic stripped down editor. I thought, where are all my command palettes and where are these dozens of commands that I'm used to? They're all essentially there. They're just kind of nicely hidden behind the scenes so they don't get in your way. So for me, Visual Studio Code, even though it appears simpler and easier, it was actually quite a transition because it does things very differently. But it's now that I understand it a little better, it's a great code editor. I'd recommend watching a few videos on it. You know, just pull up some basic tutorials on YouTube and just get familiar with the basics. Even understanding what the buttons on the left side mean, that's very helpful. And I think I did a live stream as I explored some of those things as well. So Christoph's workbook talks you through the installation and configuration of Visual Studio Code. So you'll definitely need some knowledge there. Once you get VS Code installed, you will immediately need VS Code extensions. VS Code by itself can't do much for us in the AL world or the Business Central AL world, but once you install a few of these extensions, you gain access to hundreds of very powerful features that you'll want to use for AL development. And I show a few in this screenshot on the left here. There's the core AL language extension. There is the AZ-AL Dev Tools. There is Waldo's CRS-AL language extension, and there are several others. Waldo has an extension pack where it's essentially a directory listing of several extensions that he likes, but you can explore and learn which ones you like to use. And again, Christoph's workbooks explains this as well. So you'll find some extensions you like, install those. It's just one click per extension, very, very easy to set up, and you're off and running with AL development. And then if you've made it this far and you go through one of the chapters on your first project in Christoph's workbook, you will have accomplished your first Hello World project in Business Central. And I recommend celebrating at this point. If you got this far, it means you understand or were able to conquer Docker, BC Container Helper, PowerShell, Visual Studio Code, and your AL development project. And this is a really big deal. It's quite an accomplishment. You may feel like you don't know much, but just getting all of these pieces and components and foundational elements in place, it is a lot of work. So don't take that for granted. If you got this far and you had a ton of problems, definitely celebrate. If you got this far and you didn't have any problems, celebrate, but just be aware. Look over your shoulder, because trust me, there are some little glitches and technical ghosts that are going to haunt you in the future. You just haven't run into them yet, but celebrate at this point. Okay, so now you've learned all this stuff. You've done a great job in conquering Docker and understanding BC Container Helper and creating containers, and you were able to write some code. That is fantastic. And the question I had then was, okay, I created a Hello World project, but now what? And this was kind of a confusing moment. It's like standing in an intersection that goes 20 different directions, and you do not know which direction to travel. And at this point, you need to define some type of direction and some type of focus. Where are you going to go? And that may depend largely on what's the context for you. Are you in an private organization that's using Business Central? Are you with a partner? Are you independent? Are you an ISV? You know, what is your role and what do you need to do? That would be your direction. Where are you going to travel? And in terms of your focus, how are you going to learn going forward? And so you could have APIs, more Docker, you could have focus on pages, app insights, DevOps, you know, there's all sorts of things you could learn. So I broke it down into kind of two general categories. Do you focus on the AL code side of things? And if you do, maybe you define a sample extension of your own that's relevant for you, your organization, a product you want to make, and learn how to create the tables, pages, and code units to get familiar with the syntax and structure of AL. And then you'll venture into designs and patterns and best practices and anti-patterns and how things are done in AL. And that's a big one for me. In the .NET world, we would never, ever, ever combine code and table in one object. That's an absolute anti-pattern in the .NET design world. But apparently in the Business Central AL world, that's a best practice. So for me, I'm having to unlearn and completely learn from scratch the most fundamental design patterns with AL development. It is very disorienting for me. So if you're in a similar situation, you may need to learn some of those things as well. And learning how to troubleshoot and debug, that alone is a skill. Obviously, every language in development environment is slightly different. And so AL has its own way of doing things with Business Central. So that's one way of focusing on learning the language. But there's an entire universe of other topics. And so you cannot ignore these. And so do you learn AL first? Do you learn these ancillary topics first? Or do you somehow intersperse them together so that you learn them side by side? The challenge is, this is a lot of information. Git, if you're not familiar with Git, it is it can be a fun, bumpy journey. It has its own bizarre nomenclature and way of doing things that isn't, I find it is completely unintuitive. So there are some good tutorials. I believe Scott Hanselman recently did a video on like things they didn't teach you in school or in CS class, where he just walks you through the very, very basic of Git for Dummies in a way that is much more comprehensible than what you might read online, and walks you through the terminology. If you know Luc, who is hosting this great webinar, you should be familiar with acceptance test-driven development, or test-driven development, ATDD. He has a great book on it. This alone is a huge component of your AL development. I highly recommend reading his book, attending his class, and just understanding what this is about, because it will drive your entire world of AL development. I think it should drive your world of AL development personally, especially in the SaaS world. There is no alternative that I'm aware of that can allow you to create a successful solution or a successful product. That gets you into the test toolkit and even the newly announced performance toolkit that Microsoft and the BC team just announced recently with, I believe, 2020 Wave 2. That goes hand in hand with test-driven development. And then once you get that in your tool belt, you have Azure DevOps and CI/CD pipelines. That is an entire universe of learning with YAML. And whether you decide to write your own YAML yourself, or you look into a tool or an extension like ALOps to help you make that happen, that's a big undertaking. So that's several days of learning or even weeks of learning to get your team familiar with that and come up to speed. So you can kind of see this mountain, this pile of learning growing. And then there's reports. Aside from your core AL development, maybe you need to work on BC reports, API pages, you have webhooks. And are you going to go towards AppSource and build a product that you can offer in AppSource? That's an entire journey where you sign up as a partner, you get your app registration, your IDs, your affixes, things like that. Do you want monetization with your app? Currently, at this moment, there isn't a Microsoft solution for that, so you need to build your own. How do you go about that? So all of these topics, and we had a discussion recently in a nice forum that Christoph put on where we talked about Scrum and Agile, and that may help pull all of these pieces together to help you work through this learning, work through the challenges. And so I'm reading a book, 2 books on Scrum in order to learn that, to see if that methodology can help me. So just, it's this gigantic universe of learning that is hitting me that I'm just trying to digest as quickly as I can. But this is the journey, and it's fantastic. It's frustrating. It's intimidating. It's daunting. But I'm kind of used to it coming from the consulting world. But it is an entirely new world, entirely new journey for me, and it feels like you're venturing off on your own. But there is a great community around you, so do not hesitate to ask for help and involve others in your learning journey. There are many others like you, whether you're just starting from scratch like me, or whether you're a Nav veteran coming over into the Business Central world, you name it. There are others going through the same process. So with that is my story, and those are my recommendations. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them, and I'm happy to answer them. And I see one question.
Yeah, that was not a big question, actually. I shared it already in a different way, but Christian Mutze knew how to get rid of those Windows preview updates. So I did send you through Twitter personal message the link. So thanks to Christian, of course, but he couldn't put it in the window here. He was somehow disconnected. So there are a couple of questions coming in, Steve, and a great resume of your journey, I must say. I have a couple of questions myself too, but let's give preference to the attendees. Scott Ruddle, one of our attendees that has been with us for a long time already. His question is, can you please put up the information for the nav block? So yes, we will do that, and Steve, feel free also to put it on Twitter again. I think I didn't also know. I knew Christoph was very active in like the Billionaire, many things, but I wasn't aware of that part. This one, as you mentioned, programming in L for beginners. If I don't forget, I will put it also underneath the recording as an explicit link there. Yes. So Scott, let's try if we can get that done. And if you don't find it again, of course, you can always find it on the recording. And now write down quickly. I was just typing the links, by the way, while you were presenting, Steve. So yes, thanks for sharing. That's very valuable. David Singleton, also of one of our, what's the English word for it? Steady followers. He says, it's not a question, but it was great. In fact, your experience is the exact opposite of mine. That's also nice to know. And he continues, before I get to somewhere else, I'm not sure how I'm on time right now, but if I can get the time, I would like to do a presentation. So he's picking up and also his story. A question from Thomas. Any resource for acceptance test-driven development? I think you mentioned it already.
Yes.
I'm not going to say anything about this.
Yes. So let me see if I can pull up a browser tab really quick.
Go ahead.
So Luc is very modest, and I totally understand because it's his very much his baby, and he is the preeminent leader of this. So actually, it's Pact Pub, and it is BC Test-Driven Development. Let me see if I've got that name right.
Test automation, I think. Or
test automation.
Yeah. Or if you put
okay.
Put my name in the search box, VUGT, Van VUGT.
Okay, let's just see if it comes up with this.
Yeah, it might come up also.
Oh, come on. Okay, so Luc van Vugt, test automation.
Yeah.
So here we go. So Luc's book is excellent. I have the hard copy of it just because it's easier for me physically, but I'm a big fan of the electronic version. You can purchase this on Amazon or through Pact Publishing as well. And so he does a great job of walking you through not just the mechanics, but initially the mindset and the philosophy of why. And if you're not, you need to be on board with why you're going to do all this, what might seem like all this extra work. And he explains the case for it, and it is very, very well backed up by data. This is not an opinion. This is not of like, I think this is better. This is just a database driven. This is why organizations do automated testing. And so he has a great philosophy layout in the first few chapters. And then he talks about the mechanics and walks you through some samples of how you implement it. So this is one place you can start. Luc does occasionally offer, a couple of times a year, he does offer online training where he essentially goes through this. And I attended this, I think it was back in
April even. April.
Yeah, April. And I was actually really sick with a cold or the flu at the time. So it was a painful process to me to wake up early with a cold or flu and attend the class, but it was still fantastic. And I recently, in that week learning sprint with my colleagues, we spent an entire day focusing on the first few chapters of his book. And now my organization is 100% on board with automated test-driven or acceptance test-driven development. We are very clear on the value of why we need to do this. Now it's just a matter of learning it and figuring out how to implement it for our organization.
Thanks for this advertisement. Well, it's a nice summary of indeed what the book tries to achieve indeed. Thank you, Steve. And yes, feel free to contact me on that, but it's not meant as a commercial activity. But yes, but yes, fully agree how you resume the whole thing. By the way, a remark from David Singleton. If you want to have a hard copy, buy it from Amazon. If you want to have an electronic one, go to Pact. Pact is not always very fast in delivering. Although I did order a couple of them because of a workshop I've been doing, and then from Pact I got them within a couple of days even, I think. So probably they improved.
And also not an ad. I don't necessarily recommend it. It really depends on what you're trying to do. But after buying several dozen books from Pact, I eventually signed up for their subscription. And when you subscribe, I don't know what the monthly fee is, I forgot. You essentially have access to the entire library. Yeah. And it was something reasonable, like $10 a month. And I had easily spent more than $200 over the last year with them. So I decided to just buy the subscription, and now I have access to the electronic. Many of the books I cannot download. You need to use your credits or whatever, and you still need to buy a physical copy. But if you just want to glance at books or skim through them, this is an option that might save you money.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
So
from the attendees, there's no other question at the moment. I have a couple. I was
sure.
quite impressed by the hour investment, time investment you did. Like you mentioned, working 14 hours a day together with the ongoing project. Wow, that's
Yep.
very impressive. What yeah, what would you have done differently if you had to, with this knowledge, do this again? That's always a hypothetical situation, but what would you have done differently?
I'd say, and I don't know that I could have done it differently. It was that I was trying to do many things on my own alone. And this was in 2019 and early 2020. I was very much going it alone, and my productivity doing that was much lower than if I were to involve someone else. And you know, that's easier to say than do many times, right? So how do you get someone else to participate with you in this learning journey? I was very fortunate that I found another developer who was interested, and another colleague joined us. So we were able to go through this journey together, and that's when things started to increase in velocity. When I was on my own, I had very slow learning pace because, you know, I'd get stuck, I'd get frustrated, and I would just have to stop, and I would try to resume a week later. It was very slow going. But now with another person involved, we were able to motivate each other and dedicate time together, and we were able to block out time, and almost like, you know, having a trainer at the gym or meeting a friend to go bike riding or jogging or whatever. Having that second person or third person or other people around you creates a structure that helps reinforce your learning and helps you keep you on pace, helps you dedicate that time. So when we got on the phone and we said, okay, we are going to go from Friday night through Wednesday night from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., we were all on board with that. And we were on Zoom meetings in multiple countries, all working through this together. We would end when one person went to sleep, and we'd resume when they woke up the next morning. And it was just a marathon of learning. So if you can find anyone else, whether it's in your organization or friends or colleagues or on Twitter, ask around, build that network, ask for help, and try to get others to participate. I think that was the big lesson I learned.
That's impressive to hear, especially as you have been sharing so many things during this journey. We have this page on your YouTube series, but also you did tweet so much about small things, like also you just mentioned that celebrate what you gain, etc. It is funny to realize that you're so much in the open, so much more than many of us are in different ways. That doesn't say that you are not alone at certain points in time, but hearing this from you, I think many of us would sit down and try it themselves and not even be in contact through Twitter or whatever with others.
Yes, and I've received a few comments on the YouTube series where people have said, "Thank you for this series. I worked through it just like you, and they went through the exact same journey. They just kind of watched my live stream videos as I became essentially their proxy for that colleague or friend walking through that process, and they were able to successfully get through it." So that's one alternative, and I guess I am not afraid to say that I don't know what I'm doing. I'm very upfront about that, and I'm just sharing my bumbling around trying to learn this. I'm not self-conscious in the least about that. I raise my hand and say, I do not know what I'm doing. I have no problem saying that, and I'm happy to be the one that asks all the dumb questions and runs into all the obvious problems that I, quote, should know or someone else may know. Hey, you know, this is what learning is all about. It's just admitting what you don't know and trying to figure out and learn in the process.
Yeah, that's a great advice, by the way. My last question, what made it all worthwhile?
That's a good one. You know, being able to build something, and when you see the product of that, and in Business Central, in minutes, It's shocking how quickly you can build something. Granted, it may take me 12 months to get to the point to be able to do that, but to be able to do a hello world in 60 seconds is shocking for me. To be able to create a new list page or add a custom field to a Microsoft ERP platform, SaaS no less, it is an amazing feat. So once you get over this big hurdle of learning and you can do something even minimally productive and produce something of value, that is really the reward, and say, wow, now I understand why I went through this journey. The learning can be fun. I enjoy learning. I enjoy the technical challenge, but when a customer, a partner says, hey, we have this customer with this problem, they can't see this field on this page, and you can just quickly add that as a page extension, add that field, and it's visible, and they say, wow, that's amazing. It's like, wow, that wasn't that hard. Now that I've been through the punishing boot camp, you realize, oh, okay, that wasn't that bad. So it's very rewarding to be able to build things and be productive with that knowledge. It's not just academic knowledge, it's actually pragmatic, useful, valuable knowledge in the marketplace.
Sounded clear. Thank you very much, Steve. There is no other question on the list, so I'm going to switch and share my screen. So with my closing slide. Steve, thank you very much. It was really worthwhile. I did made a note on Twitter that it's always worthwhile listening to you, and this proved it again. Thank you very much. I think many of us have been, well, somehow bumping into you on Twitter, on YouTube. It is impressive to see that somebody from the outside world, if I call it that way, stepped in and immediately start to just share things, even the bloopers and the things you wanted to celebrate in whatever way. So yeah, it's great to have you around, if I may put that as a personal note to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for picking up the gauntlet that I threw at you with the question if you wanted to do a webinar about your journey, actually. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody for attending. People are, well, we're getting to the hour, so that's nicely within the hour, by the way. People are now leaving. Have a nice evening for those in Europe, and enjoy the meal at home. Steve, yeah, your day is just starting. Thanks for being here that early on your side. Enjoy the day for the rest, and well, let's see if we meet again someday live.
Hopefully soon. Yep.
Keep healthy, everybody, and well, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.